Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our October Med XRSI meeting. Today we are going to give our usual updates, and then we have two special guests, Dr. Charles Binkley and Dr. Joe Morgan, and they will be telling us about the books they have published this year or will be published this year, and how that intersects with the work we do in this council. So we're going to start with that first, and then go to the usual business of our updates on Metaverse Safety Week and our guidelines. So let's jump right into it. Dr. Binkley, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Scott. I appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody coming. We'll make this as interactive as possible. So I'm going to go ahead. What I'll do is I'll just pause occasionally as I'm going through my slides. And, and if there are questions or comments anybody has, uh, please, and stop me otherwise also if you have questions or comments. So just a little bit about my background and my interest in AI, and I think this oftentimes helps people kind of understand where I'm coming from or my sort of point of view. I'm a surgeon, and specifically a liver and pancreas cancer surgeon, and I spent most of my career practicing in San Francisco, California, and I also ran the ethics service, the clinical ethics service. But patients would come to see me with pancreatic cancer, and the data are that if you have pancreatic cancer, and even with optimal surgery, optimal chemotherapy, optimal tumor characteristics, you still have an 80% chance, and this is with treatment, an 80% chance of dying within 5 years. Your greatest risk is within the first 2 to 3 years. And that is with optimal treatment. So only 20% of patients that we operate on with a curative intention actually have 5 years or greater survival. And part of the conversation with patients would be, look, I can't guarantee you 5 years or more, but in order to have that, you have to go through all of these things. And I kept asking myself, particularly after I was in practice for, 5, 6, 7 years, and I started opening patients' charts and they were dead. And I knew those were the data, those were the odds. And I kept thinking about how can I better stratify patients and their likelihood of achieving a benefit from surgery? What tools can we use? And it wasn't just me asking this question. This question was being asked throughout the world. How can we better inform patients? How can we better tell patients about the benefit in using ethics language? And we had looked at everything. We looked at serum markers, we looked at tumor markers, we looked at all kinds of characteristics, and nothing panned out. And all of a sudden, I started hearing about artificial intelligence, and it just made so much sense that there may be patterns that we're not recognizing, whether it be patterns in genes, patterns in cells, patterns in one's life, that are more predictive of outcome than any single factor that we can account for. So that's really my interest in AI, is to decrease clinical uncertainty. Somebody has a stroke, and we say, here's the range of potential outcomes. And could AI help us narrow that range for better decision making? So I specifically address using AI for clinical decision making. And so the first question I ask is really, why do we need ethics? Why is an understanding of ethics really essential for AI and healthcare? And so when I think about, Hippocrates getting this band of vagabonds together in ancient Greece and saying, I want you to go out and tell people, oh, well, I'll take care of you. I'll heal you. I will treat your illnesses and your diseases. How did he foster trust? How did this group of yahoos actually get people to come and see them? And I think they did it through ethics. They said, these are the things that you can trust from us. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to make a public profession that if you come to see me, you can trust these things. And I think that that's still how we do it. Patients don't come to see me and they don't check and say, you're not going to tell anybody this, are you? You're going to, they can assume that I'm going to maintain confidence. They can assume that I'm going to prioritize their benefit. and minimize their harm. They can assume that I have a fiduciary responsibility to them and that I'm going to place their benefit above my own, that I'm going to recommend surgery not because I need to pay my mortgage this month, but because I want to do the greatest good for them. I want to achieve whatever goal they have, whether it be increased function, increased survival, or decreased suffering. And so what are those things? What is part of my social contract as a physician? And it's to really respect patients as persons, again, to do good, avoid harm, maintain confidence. And I think that's a huge piece of that trust agreement. Be truthful and transparent, again, another piece, and informing patients and seeking their consent. And so when I think about AI, I think about AI from the perspective of the stakeholders. What are the stakeholders' concerns when AI is introduced? And so, who are the stakeholders? Who are the relevant parties that we need to think about as we're introducing AI? And these are the sort of four groups that I have. And the physician and the patient are always central to this relationship. But I also think we have to think about, what's behind the AI model? Who's behind the AI model? And these are the programmers, developers, and data scientists on one side of it, on the build side, and then the health system executives and the payers on the implementation side. So how does this all work? How do we put this together? So we have the clinician and the patient at the center of the relationship. And when I use physician, I'm thinking about more broadly clinicians. So that you have the clinician and the patient. And you have this normative relationship that I've outlined previously. You've got respect for persons, you've got beneficence and non-maleficence, you have informed consent, privacy and confidentiality. And those are all things that ensconce this relationship. And then you're introducing an AI model into that. And in my mind, the AI model has to at least reflect, if not deepen, those normative expectations. Because if the AI model doesn't have those same normative values, then there's going to be a conflict of interest. So for instance, if the patient comes in and can trust that the physician prioritizes their benefit, but the AI model prioritizes something else over the benefit of the patient, if that's part of the AI model's trade-offs, then there's going to be an incongruence. There's going to be a tension that's not generative. There's actually going to be a conflict of interest. And because the AI model is nothing without those who are behind it, those who are building it, those who are implementing it, I believe pretty strongly that those same normative expectations extend to those other people, the people behind the scene, the Ozian characters. And I think more and more we're seeing that this is true. We saw a couple of weeks ago the FDA commissioner basically say that health systems have to step up and regulate these models, right? And regulating the models really mean that they have to be implemented in such a way that they reflect the ethics, that they reflect the normative expectations of the patients as these models are deployed. So how does this look? So again, I'm going to start thinking about how does this look to a group of physicians? When we approach physicians and we start thinking about implementing AI, what are their concerns? And I think about this from the perspective of how do clinicians make decisions, and how is AI different or similar to the ways in which we make decisions? What are our sources of knowledge in making decisions? And I pull from three. We use the literature, we use clinical calculators, and we use collaborations with our colleagues. So as a pancreatic surgeon, I think about pancreatic cancer. And so when patients come to see me with pancreatic cancer, I can put them into one of these three buckets. And I can say, based on these three buckets, based on your performance, this is the ECOG score. This is a measurement of how robust or frail somebody is physiologically. And then I can go through and say, if you're here, these are the treatments that we recommend. These are not made up by somebody. Drug companies didn't propagate this. This is all based on clinical research, retrospective and prospective. It has been peer reviewed. It has been published in the literature. I can cite studies that show evidence-based medicine that supports each of these claims, each of these points in the algorithm. is based on hard data that reflect all of these ethics, all these normative expectations that I've outlined. So how's an AI model similar to or different from a clinical pathway? So for a clinical pathway, the benefit's proven. These outcomes are proven. For most AI models, they've been validated to make the prediction that they are programmed to make. So they're accurate, but that accuracy doesn't necessarily translate into benefit. Hypothetically, it will. So for instance, I can say hypothetically that if I'm able to predict a group of patients' risk of HIV, and I mitigate that risk, I will decrease the incidence of AIDS and HIV. But that's a hypothesis until it's proven. What if there are other harms that I'm not accounting for that predictive model is causing? So while we can hypothesize that accuracy translates into benefit, we don't know that until we study it. The clinical reasoning of a clinical pathway, as I've demonstrated, suggested, can be known, it can be shown, it's evidence-based. It's these recommendations have come from trials. With an AI model, you can't really know what the clinical reasoning is undergirding it. You can know what the prediction is, you can know how the model was trained, you can know the data sources, but you can't really know the reasoning. These models in general are not explainable. And with a clinical pathway, you can assume shared values. You can assume that the people who ran the studies, who wrote the papers, who peer review them, share the same values that you do. But that's not necessarily, you can't so easily presume that with an AI model. So the next sort of level of evidence that we use is a surgical risk calculator. And this is a very common question that I get asked, because we've been making predictions about patients for decades now. How is an AI model different? How is an AI model different than an Apache score or a MEL score or any of these other risk stratification tools that we commonly use? What's the big deal here? And I want to suggest that these are the differences, and these are important differences. Again, getting back to the three we saw before: clinical benefit, clinical reasoning, and shared values. But I also think from a privacy perspective, so if I run a model, if I take a patient's electronic medical record and I try to stratify their risk of recovery from a stroke, and I put their data into a model, and it gives me their recovery likelihood. It's not a prediction. It's based on patients who have had the same condition and their likelihood. So it's evidence-based as opposed to a predictive model. And those data, when you enter those, they're not retained, right? They're not used for either that model's improvement or for the build of another model. So the key difference is that an AI model depends on a data stream in order to continue in its accuracy, whereas these other models are relatively static. The variables are inputted and they make a prediction based on that. They don't rely on the data itself. And for a clinical calculator, I can show you, I'm just going to go back. I can show you how I can mitigate that risk. I can show you if you stop smoking, for instance, or you stop using steroids, I can change your outcome, your risk of having a complication after you have surgery. But it's not possible to mitigate an AI prediction. So if an AI model predicts a certain operative mortality, I don't know what contributes to that. And I think it's actually problematic if clinicians assume they know why an AI model makes the prediction it does. It can lead to faulty logic. And then collaboration with colleagues. Again, I get asked this question a lot. And so I think the key difference is here, besides the shared values, being able to, if I go to a colleague who's a physician or a clinician and collaborate on a case, I can assume certain shared values, but not necessarily with an AI model. And the same thing is true with the dialogue that may occur if I go to a colleague to discuss a patient. We can critique each other, question, discuss, and dialogue, but you can't really do that with an AI model. So any questions at this point about the ethics concerns from a clinician's perspective?
Um, so when we're looking at what's been done up till now and what the norms are, what would be the what would what would be the gaps in those norms that could be filled by AI or just or are the AI type solutions or adjuncts just complicating the process of decision making?
Oh, I think that it has huge potential to address uncertainty.
Hmm.
I mean, so I mean, Julia, I mean, if you go to see a doctor and they give you antibiotics, they're almost certainly going to say, well, we'll try this for a few days, and if you're not getting better, give me a call, right?
Right.
That's all uncertainty. Like, I think this is going to
Hmm.
help. It's more likely they're not going to help, but if it doesn't, please give me a call. You know,
Hmm.
I think about patients with cancer, right? So I do cancer surgery. I send them to see an oncologist, and the oncologist says, well, I'm going to start chemotherapy, and then I'm going to scan you in 3 months and see how the chemotherapy is working. 3 months, right? So I mean, it seems barbaric when you stand back and like, I have to wait 3 months to figure out if this poison that's going into my veins, every 2 weeks is working, right?
Hmm.
Don't we have better ways of predicting it? And we don't, right? We don't have better ways of predicting it. So much of our, just as an anecdote, I'll tell you about this story. I got called to come see a patient the other day, and they're like, this crazy, it's always so tough. This crazy wife is refusing a feeding tube for her husband. And I'm like, okay. So I go and I see her, and I'm like, tell me a little bit about, understanding of your husband's illness. And she said, look, a month ago they said he's never going to wake up. You should just withdraw life-sustaining treatment and let him die. And 2 days later, he's sitting up in bed, awake, alert. And then a few days later, they said he's never going to get off the ventilator. You need to put a tracheostomy in. And 2 days later, he's off the ventilator. He's breathing by himself. And now they're saying you need to put a feeding tube in him. Why should I trust them? Right? So they made the best predictions they could. Like, statistically speaking, in every one of these situations, he was probably not going to, taken in whole, thinking about all patients, right? From a population-based perspective, that's true. But for him specifically, personalized predictions, they were wrong. And that clinical uncertainty wound up costing trust. And so that's the gap that I think these models can fill. Now, they can also, and I'm just going to go, it's a great question. I'm just going to talk about how they can breed mistrust. So I think that the patient, when I think about the patient relative to an AI model, they're really two things. A patient is the patient, right? They give their information in order to gain a therapeutic benefit, but they're also a donor. So this information is presumably going to be used not just for that patient's benefit, but for other patients' benefit. It's going to be used to train other models, or if you have a continuously learning model, to improve that model's performance if you have an adaptive model. So whether you have if you have a locked model, your data is certainly going to be used to train other models with the intention of conferring a benefit to someone else. And so I think I use the term donor. I think it's an apt term. I'm actually giving a talk at a law school of all places next week, which has me a little anxious. I've never submitted an article to a law journal, But I'm thinking about, what is there legal precedent for this? And I think there actually is. I'm going to argue that. So stay tuned. So this is a study that came out a couple of years ago now. I guess it was published almost 2 years ago. Pew Trust asked patients about their trust in AI. And they actually found that 60% of patients would be uncomfortable. And if you drill down and you try to find out why they're uncomfortable, what are they uncomfortable about? What are they concerned about? They're concerned about the security of their records, which I translate in ethics speak is privacy and confidentiality. And they're concerned about the relationship. They're concerned about the relationship with another person. And what does that person bring? What does that person bring to the relationship? In some ways, the human in the loop is going to slow the thing down. It's actually going to make it perform less well. And I tell you, just I am in my role, I help with clinical implementation. Patients love the interface. They love the AI interface. It's cheerful, it's never grumpy, it's never hungry, it's never rushed. And if it's also better, if it's technically better and kinder, we're going to have to step aside. Patients are going to demand AI over us, right? But right now, we're still very much in this middle place where we're trying to foster trust. We're trying to foster clinical adoption, but also patient trust. And patients perceive that if we keep a human in the loop, all these things that I value in humans will be there. It's the idea of shared agency. The agency of the physician is decision making, but it's an ethical decision making. It's not just simply an objective decision making. And so what is transparency to a patient? I think we have to be very, and I was on a somewhat tense call yesterday with, I'm part of something called HYPE. It's a number of large health systems that are implementing AI, and we kind of get together and talk. And a question came up. I led a discussion about transparency. I think transparency is extraordinarily important. And what is transparency, right? Is this transparency? So Weill Cornell, my neighbors to the east, run this ad pretty frequently in print. They also on NPR every morning. I listen to NPR Morning Edition. Come to Weill Cornell. We use the latest in AI and machine learning technology for improved diagnosis and treatment. And I think their slogan is it be amazing, stay amazing, right? Come here. So is that disclosure? Is that adequate for disclosure? Is it a reasonable expectation that patients will know if they go to Weill Cornell that AI and machine learning has been used in their care? Is disclosure adequate for transparency? And is consent required? These are unanswered questions, but I think that these are looming just below the surface. I was on a call, part of the call yesterday was with some colleagues from a hospital in Texas, and the Texas legislature had been visiting that hospital yesterday. And Texas wants to be first. They want very much to come up with they want to be the first to have a big splash in AI, from what I hear from my colleagues, and they want it to be around patients' bills of rights relative to AI. So how can we encode AI into the AI lifecycle? So the governance structure is key, and I can talk a lot about governance structures, having helped develop one for our health network, and then I chaired the governance structure in our medical school. So thinking a lot about governance and education. How do you foster responsible use for students? How do you foster responsible implementation from a pedagogical perspective? How do you choose a good vendor? How do you compare vendors? And then also, how do you foster the use of AI in your faculty's research in a responsible way? I think it's all about a systematic process in which you evaluate each model uh, based on subject matter expertise and also some level of expertise about AI. And I also think you have to have a very clearly defined chain of command. In healthcare, we have to ask about every model, what level of harm is too great? We can quantify how much harm I cause as a surgeon. We can look at my mortality rates, my wound infection rates, my return to the OR rates, my rates of major complications. Are we going to, is an AI model going to be held to a higher standard than that? And then how much benefit is too little? If a model doesn't impact care in some way, should we actually be keeping, or should we be using it? And then what are the thresholds for decommissioning? And these are the four phases that I think about in the AI lifecycle. And I think we have to think about what are the ethics concerns, not just from the perspective of the stakeholders, but what are the specific ethics concerns from in each of these phases of the life cycle. So that is the book. The University of California Press. You can open your Amazon account and type in Binkley, and my book comes up. If you don't buy it, you can give me some star ratings to say how one. Or if you do buy it, you can give me some star ratings to say how good it is. I'm like your Uber driver with give me stars. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you so much, Charles.
Yes,
This is fantastic summary, and it is worth reading. I've gone through it. I've spilled coffee on it, and it's been through a few airports, but definitely worthwhile, especially if I think for me it was not being a physician or clinician, understanding what goes into that whole process a little bit better and the dynamics of each of the roles. So for me, it was very informative and educational. Right, awesome. So we're gonna switch over to Joe, and then we can have a more open discussion. Just want to make sure we get both overviews. All right, Joe, the floor
Yeah.
is yours.
All right. Well, thanks for that. I'll share my presentation and we'll get going. I will be brief. So I am Joe Morgan. I am a anesthesiologist by training. Let's see if we can get it into full screen mode here, if it'll let me. There we go. And 7 or 8 years ago, I founded a company called Waya Health. And prior to that, I did a bunch of work in wearable devices, physiologic tracking, IoT, really with regards to those devices used within health and wellness. And so this book has been in the works for about 7 years. And it's really something that, I had sort of a punctuated equilibrium in terms of writing a chapter, coming back to it after 6 months, and so on. And things continue to evolve. And really, it became clear a year or so ago that this was a great opportune time to get this information out there, because of really what is obvious to me. We're clearly entering a phase of convergence of these different technologies, and the sum is more than the individual parts. And in terms of when you combine AI and XR, you have some very unique capabilities, and the same could be said for other newer technologies as well. At the bottom there is the book website. We plan on releasing this around Christmas. It will be available on Amazon. Please go ahead and sign up on the book website. It's just entering your email so that we can reach out to everyone. And the book is really about how personalized data, extended reality, and other technologies will transform healthcare. I've mentioned some of this already. I founded a company called Waya Health in 2016. We build solutions that assess, treat, and deliver care to patients using extended reality. As I mentioned, I'm a board certified anesthesiologist. I also have been developing now for over a decade, do work in computer vision, Python, C#. I have a certificate in artificial intelligence in medicine that's coming up for renewal. And the company website is right there, and there's my LinkedIn. So just a few slides talk about the book, very high level. and what it's about and who it might be useful for. So the book is really answering this question: what types of data are relevant to which issues based on the evidence? And so obviously I can't cover all issues, but really what I tried to do was focus on highly prevalent issues, things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, inactivity, sleep apnea, poor sleep hygiene, and so forth. And really, there are these interwoven themes, virtual and augmented reality being one of them, that appear throughout the book and really tie it together in terms of giving information what data is useful for what issue, but then also interweaving a picture of the future and where I anticipate things are going. And really the goal is to empower patients with the information of what's relevant for which issues based on the evidence. It's really focused on patient-centered care, shifting more towards a preventative and wellness type approach. And I cover the range of applicabilities from, you have a piece of data, how can I use this as a 20-year-old male to prevent cardiovascular disease? How can I use this as somebody who maybe already had a heart attack to prevent another one, and so forth. And so it's really about patient empowerment and really working towards that sort of N of one personalized healthcare model that we've all talked about for years. And that's what's got me very excited about this time in general, is that we're with the aforementioned convergence, I think we're getting close to this being a real possibility. And so, diving into some more about the personalized tracking and prevention approach, focusing on trends, and really giving the patient or the reader, whether it's a patient or provider, the tools to be able to trend things out and be able to contextualize information that comes back maybe from wearable trackers, maybe from some of the newer technologies that are really delivering metrics that have been around for a while, but also doing so in a way that's, the sampling rate is much more often. One illustrative example is continuous glucose monitoring. Forever it was finger pricks that if you did them, and at best it was maybe 3 a day, and now we have kind of on the fly, momentary, continuous monitoring of glucose. And so there's a couple of consequences from that. One is that folks, through a feedback loop, especially the CGMs that are tied to insulin pumps, they're going to have much better glucose control. And the other outcome is one that's to be determined, but certainly the data is an outcome in and of itself, not a patient-oriented outcome, but certainly a disease-oriented outcome, with regards to having that data set of continuous data, and then going back and being able to make associations or correlations between a more granular picture of glucose levels and X, Y, and Z. So that is, one of the many means by which, these data are going to come to the forefront. And I think it was touched upon in the previous deck that a lot of things that are within the space of AI, broadly speaking, are a black box in terms of how do you determine, how it's getting from point A to point B, essentially. I think that that's not going to be a problem that's solved anytime soon. And the reason I say that, and this, of course, speculation, but the reason I say that is because it's very much in the DNA of the computational approach itself. So, and it is a good analogy to think about a biological brain in this instance, in this particular context, where I lift my right arm and there's a certain neurological circuitry that fires. But if Julia lifts her right arm, for example, it's not the exact same set of neurological circuitry. In other words, like spatiotemporally within the brain, it's just not like that. That's not how it works. And so, but we know that there is a neuron that fires, in the motor cortex, and I lift up my right arm. Obviously, an oversimplification, but the point being that it's similar in that way. So I think that all of that is to get back to the point, which is that data in and many times outcomes out in the context of neural nets and similar approaches. It's really critical to contextualize what you're putting in, and the sort of black box in the middle. I don't at all think that we should not try to figure out how to explain it. I think that would be awesome if we can. But I also think that at the same time, it may be a long time before we kind of, see what's under the hood and understand it in a real way. So back to the slide here, the other thing that is a central focus within the book is actionable data. So what information is actionable when and why? And really these sort of macro trends of going from, again, slice and time to continuous monitoring. And another trend that's really important is we're also going from things that are kind of a pain in the butt for patients, put this Fitbit on, log these data on some web app, to things like this, a Oura ring that's kind of passive. And the next evolution will be fly on the wall, where essentially, this stuff is happening. You don't have to do anything. You're not asking the patient to do anything. Of course, you're doing it with their consent, but basically they want to be able to improve their health. And there's, a variety of different sensors that are just kind of there getting this information. And then, 6 months later, you look back and boom, there it is. And so that's a paradigm shift in health. And that enables early detection, which is the last bullet point there. And so, how does this affect the sort of provider-patient relationship? And I think this is a really important aspect. It's one of the interwoven themes. And really, because you have all this data, it's really critical to have regular interactions with your providers, and providers really need to be at the forefront of driving those touch points, and really an emphasis on collaboration, and really, patient provider teams is what I call them, and extended reality in the context of it's really in many ways a sensor on steroids. It's got the two most powerful sensors in the world, in my opinion, which is it's the webcam in front of you. It's a microphone and an RGB camera. And increasingly, that's becoming pretty clear. You can get so much from computer vision and, audio signal processing, analysis, and AI applied to audio as well. And so really, it enables a system of continuous improvement based on data. And that is really what the book's about. And so just to recap in 15 seconds, the book is about collecting what data and why. It's about moving into this place of having continuous metrics available for us. It's about collaboration with patients and providers. And it's also about where things are going. And so with that, here's the information again, and I yield the floor.
Joe, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, and we're looking forward to reading that one in the new year. And one of the kind of the two things you're describing there of the kind of continuous monitoring and using the sensors that are in our consumer technology for our health. And what always comes to mind for me with this is that these devices are that we're using are not made by med device companies that have, a particular
Sure.
process and code of it's coming from Apple and Meta and so on. So do you, how does that integration happen with the healthcare system in a way that, puts the appropriate incentives in place for these corporations and, have that alignment with the ethics of medical care? I don't know if you have an answer, but like how, because there's so much power in these, and we can use them for ourselves,
Yeah,
but
and the
how
book
do
does
yeah.
the scope of the book does not go into
Mhm.
um it does not go into
Mhm.
Fitbit heart rate versus FDA cleared heart rate.
Right.
It's not
Mhm.
a regulatory science book. It's
Mhm.
about heart rate and what it's useful
Yeah.
for. And it, the assumption is that, this metric is, you know,
Mhm.
it's the true value.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in other words, the scope of the book is really you have X, Y, and Z data streams,
Mhm.
and they are the data streams. So in other
Mhm.
words, it makes so CGM.
Mhm.
I don't think that there is a CGM out there that's not FDA cleared.
No,
But
that one's
um,
definitely my device side. Mhm.
Right, right. And again, it doesn't really it's not really the intention of the book to go
Okay.
into regulatory science type issues, but it is meant to empower patients
Mhm.
with information of, for example, I'll give one illustrative example that I really like because it's so intimately tied with outcomes.
Mhm.
And that is resting heart rate. Well, it turns out low resting heart rate, if you are not having symptoms, you're not having syncope, you're not passing out, you're having no chest pain, just no symptoms. My resting heart rate's 38, and I have no symptoms. Well, it turns out that that's actually a measure of longevity. So these are the sorts of little tidbits that can really empower patients. And so really it's a curation of the high yield points of information. There's over 1,000 references within the book.
Mhm.
And so everything is referenced using peer-reviewed literature. In situations where there was, just a gargantuan amount of evidence, for example, Framingham type outcomes with regards to hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and so forth. We were very picky. We utilized basically, the Cochrane review,
Mhm.
um, and really tried to utilize the available evidence that was the highest level available for the thing of focus.
Awesome. Yeah. Um, Kavya?
Yeah, and I think, Julia, you sort of asked a similar question, and I know, Joe, maybe this is outside the scope of the book a little bit, but it is also to Dr. Binkley, just trying to utilize your knowledge to make an opinion or understanding here. When you were researching or collecting all these opinions or other stuff about the book, what did you find was like the best way, like you said, feeding the medical record to AI? What did you learn from that experience was the best way to preserve confidentiality, preserve privacy, and feed that data into the AI model? That's just like one. And Joe, for you, it's like when you combine all this, whatever received data, and feed it into a model, what was the ideal? It's the same question for both of you. It's like, what was the ideal best case scenario to preserve confidentiality and preserve privacy? It's something that you may have learned, even though it may not be in the book, but just, curious about your experience. And then the second question, which is more like a comment, Dr. Binkley, I really found it interesting that you said not just diversity, but genuine diversity. And I was curious that intentional use of it and what does that mean in health care systems for us. So if you would please share that. Thank you.
Well, I can say something about genuine diversity. I see a lot of um, committees assembled, people put together um, in order to appear diverse, but they don't necessarily represent diverse opinions, diverse perspectives, diverse lived experiences. So, for instance, genuine diversity in my mind means having patients be part of the conversation, which I know seems revolutionary. But that's in some ways that doesn't like you're like, why are patients not part of this conversation? We talk at patients a lot, we talk about patients a lot, but really letting patients be part of that conversation. I think about it also in terms of our interdisciplinary partners. I mean, when you look at a lot of the governance structures in large health systems for AI, it really is based on what your position is within the organization, more so than it is based on content expertise or, again, lived experiences. And so when I think about the diversity of the governance structures, I'm looking, yeah, if there are not nurses that are part of that, if there are not social workers that are part of that, then I think we really haven't achieved the type of diversity that leads to robustness. So that's what I think about in terms of genuine diversity. Joe, I really, really appreciated what you were saying. This morning I got a call from someone, and this is something we may want to talk about offline. I got a call from somebody saying, I want a solution that will predict falls from a patient safety and quality perspective, right? And I found this device, and we can put it on. It's going to predict who's going to fall. And so there are all these robust, wonderful questions about what models we should choose. Do we need AI to tell us that somebody's going to fall? Right? It's are there other tools that are just as effective as an AI model in predicting things like that? The other thing that you mentioned that I think is so important, and that is multimodal data. And I think what Julia was asking in some ways is, and I don't want to say this is what I think she was saying, but I think one of the things that I think about in that context is, what is health data, right? Is this health data? Is this protected under HIPAA, right? What is that line? And as we are collecting more and more data, I mean, as it turns out, cell phone usage is more predictive of mental health than is anything else. The number of mistakes that you make when you're typing. And so I run this AI ethics lab with a group of medical students, and a number of them are cooperating with industry. I actually have a meeting with AI Doc in 4 minutes. But they're looking to think about how to pull in multimodal data, exactly what you're saying, in order to make better predictions. The electronic medical record is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that with regards to the point you made about the sort of tendency to rush to AI being the solution, I think that's spot on. I think there's a lot of things that can be handled through perhaps still even within the umbrella of AI, but they're explainable machine learning models, simpler classifiers, k-means, and just a whole variety of different tools. Even the sort of classical confusion matrix, sensitivity, specificity, and so forth are extremely useful. And I think the hype cycle has driven a rush for the neural net being like, can we use that for this? And I think you're right. I agree. And really, the element about this current time that has me, very positive about, I think the prognosis for healthcare in general, as well as, has me wanting to get this book out there now, is it's a combination of this situation with AI and also the sort of accompanying sensor technology and ability to get these multimodal data. And so, that really is critical, and it's kind of they're really tied at the hip in that, you need to know what types of data are going to be useful for whatever in order to be able to, detect whatever, or to be able to see where things are going or whatever. And so that's why it's that fundamental question of what data is useful for what issues.
Exactly.
And that's really what the book focuses on. Yeah.
And that aspect of relevancy and actionable, I think, is going to be important for in the sense that system integration, so that it's not just an even more overload of data to be interpreted, but the development work being done now and figuring out what is actually what's actually actionable, and will have an impact, and whether that's something I'll say end user patient takes action on, or the whole care team needs to take action on. But there's a lot of promise there. And I think for people like me who never go to the doctor, it'll be even more important. So just filling out a form and I'm like, oh, when's the last time you saw your primary care physician? I'm like, 2019. So a little while. Okay. Let's switch over the quick updates, and Charles and Joe, if you need to hop off right at the hour for your next meetings, I understand this it'll be recorded, so you can take a look later. But we really appreciate you sharing your work and having this conversation with us. And this all contributes to the collective intelligence of this group. Okay, so just quick updates since last month. With Paul Jones, we've made progress on framing Metaverse Safety Week, and Joe Payal and Divya are kind of helping flesh it out now that we have the framework. And it'll be 3 groups or 3 phases of the session on December 11th. In the first objective, the first hour, will be using Swarm AI, and that will be talking about the earliest process in terms of using XR in healthcare. And so we're expanding this out this time with the guidance of Paul, including the use of XR in the design of medicine, the design of pharmaceuticals, and training of the workforce beyond the direct clinical care, but also in the life sciences. So we're going to expand this a little bit. So if you have ideas on that, please share. On the middle will be our usual demos. So these will be 5-10 minutes with individuals kind of highlighting the challenges and how they're approaching those challenges. So we have a few that we're putting together there. We're open to suggestions. And then in the third objective, the third section, it'll be more of an open-ended discussion using ThinkScape. And this will be focused on the implementation. So going from the discovery all the way out to the practice of using these technologies. So in that way, it'll cover the full spectrum, okay, maybe not full spectrum, but a spectrum within the 3 hours. And that will be the morning Pacific of the December 11th. We'll adjust to everyone's time zones. Yeah. And then in terms of the guidelines, we've begun to have volunteers to help author these. And based on that, Skip Rizzo and Valentino have said they're available to work on the guidelines this quarter. So that prioritizes the topics. So the first guidelines we'll put together for the journal are the pain mitigation and management is as one, and then another on mental health and psychiatry applications. And so that's going to be the active work for us this month and next month, to take the comprehensive research we've done and put it into these topics. And those will be maybe 2,000, 3,000 word sort of documents. And then those will get submitted to the journal. So that's our progress there. All right. Otherwise, we're just moving along, doing these things. And I would encourage people to stay active on Slack and check the things we post there, which has a lot of relevant news. So All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you again next month.